I am 81 years old, and in the autumn of 1995, on a cold Tuesday morning in the hills of East Tennessee, my heart stopped. Not for a few minutes. For close to 2 hours, my body lay on the frost-hardened ground behind my barn, and I was gone from this world entirely. I know what most people feel when they hear something like that. A tightening in the chest, a quiet reaching for some way to explain it away. I felt that same tightening for most of my life, whenever death came up. There was always something small and afraid underneath the faith I professed. Something that wondered in the dark after the prayer was said, whether any of it was truly, solidly real. I want to tell you today that I was wrong to doubt. More completely wrong than I have ever been about anything in my 81 years on this earth. What I found on the other side of that November morning was not darkness. It was not silence. It was not the end of anything I loved. It was the most alive I have ever been. And if you are someone who has prayed through doubt, who has stood at a graveside in winter and whispered God's name into the cold and waited for some kind of answer, I need you to stay with me right now. What I am about to tell you took a lifetime of ordinary days and 2 hours of eternity to understand. If what I share touches something deep inside you, subscribe to this channel. Leave a word in the comments. Let us be company for one another on this road, because I was sent back here for a reason, and I have come to believe that reason is you. I was 69 years old in the fall of 1995, retired. 34 years of farming the same stretch of Tennessee earth that my grandfather had first broken with a mule and a hand plow, and I had finally handed the larger fields over to my son the summer before. My wife Helen and I lived in the same farmhouse where we had raised our 3 children. The mornings were quiet in a way I had not permitted myself to appreciate when I was younger and busier. The sound of the creek below the pasture, the geese moving south over the ridge, the particular stillness of a November morning before the sun clears the tree line. I had grown up in the faith, Baptist. My mother read scripture every morning before breakfast, her voice low and steady, the King James words filling the kitchen like something you could lean against. I believed in God the way I believed in the seasons, real, inevitable, coming every year whether you prepared for it or not. But it was a surface faith, if I am being honest. A house I had lived in so long, I had stopped seeing the walls. That fall, I had been having trouble with my heart for several months. Not the dramatic kind, quiet trouble. A heaviness behind the sternum when I climbed the stairs. A shortness of breath walking the fence line in the evening. Helen had been asking me to see Doc Harmon in Morristown since August. I had told her I would go, and then I had found every reason not to. I was a man who had worked since I was 9 years old. The idea that my body might be failing me was not something I was willing to sit still with. So I kept moving. Kept splitting wood for the winter, kept feeding the livestock, kept doing the things that told me I was still useful to this land and to this family. The morning it happened was an ordinary one in every way. Cold. The deep East Tennessee November cold that gets into the seams of your coat and refuses to leave. I had gone out before full light to look at the gutter along the back of the barn that I had noticed pulling away from the roof line the week before. I needed to get it fixed before the hard freeze came. I remember the walk from the back door of the house across the yard, the frost on the grass. That is the last earthly thing I truly hold on to. The way the dead grass crunched under my boots with each step, each footprint leaving a dark, wet mark where the frost broke and the ground showed through underneath. Iron hard ground, the smell of cold wood and dry leaves. I put my hand on the ladder and felt the metal cold through my gloves. And then something happened inside my chest that I can only describe as a door swinging shut. Not violent, more like a finality. Like something in me said, "That is enough now." And I went down. My back hit the frozen ground, and I felt the cold of it, that particular deep cold of the earth in November that comes up through a body like a truth. And then I felt nothing at all on this earth for a long, long time. I do not know how long I lay there before Helen found me. Long enough that when she did, she told me afterward my lips had gone the color of the frost on the grass. She ran inside and called for help, and the ambulance came out from Morristown. And the men who came did everything that men can do. But for a long stretch of that morning, there was no heartbeat behind my ribs. There was no breath moving in my chest. There was no old farmer lying behind his barn in the hills of East Tennessee. There was only what I am about to try to describe to you, knowing before I begin that the words I have available were built for this world. And what I experienced was not this world. The first thing I knew was that I was not cold anymore. I want you to understand how significant that is, because that cold had been the last thing my body registered. The bone-deep November cold of the frozen ground against my spine. And then it was simply gone. Not replaced by warmth in the way a blanket is warm, replaced by the complete absence of any need for warmth. It was as if the entire physical framework of the body, its constant negotiation with temperature, with gravity, with pain, had ceased to exist. And I was elsewhere, not drifting, not flying, just elsewhere. The way you are elsewhere when you step from a dark room into afternoon sunlight. Complete and immediate, with no journey between one place and the other. I was aware of myself as a self, aware that I existed, that I had a history, that I was the same man who had walked across that frost-covered yard a moment ago. But the self I inhabited was lighter than anything I had known in 69 years of carrying a body. The ache in my lower back from a tractor accident in 1978 was gone. The stiffness in my hands on cold mornings was gone. The weight behind my sternum was gone. There was just presence, just awareness. And around me, in every direction, without exception, there was light. Not the light of the sun, which is directional and demanding and makes your eyes work to receive it. This light was the element I existed in. It moved. It was alive. I do not know a better word than breathing. The light breathed, slowly and perfectly, with a rhythm that was the most peaceful thing I have ever perceived. Like the sound of a river heard from inside a dream of a river, more real than the thing itself. I became aware that I was not alone. There were presences around me that I perceived not primarily through sight, as I understood sight, but through something more direct than that. The way you perceive love or grief, as something that fills a space entirely before you have words for it. These presences were kind, deeply, entirely kind, in a way that made every human kindness I had ever received in my life seem like a rough approximation of what kindness actually is at its source. I was not afraid. In that place, fear had nowhere to stand. Fear requires a future to aim itself at, a tomorrow that might go wrong. And in that place there was only now, a now without edges, without threat, without anything jagged or unresolved. And then I became aware of the presence. I knew it before I turned toward it, if turning is even the right word for what I did. I knew it the way you know your own name, when someone who loves you calls it across a room, not as new information, but as the deepest recognition you possess. Something in me had always known this. Something in me had been reaching toward this my entire life. Without knowing, that was what the reaching was. All those Sunday mornings, all those prayers in the dark, kneeling beside the bed while Helen breathed quietly beside me. All those evenings I had stood at the edge of the pasture at dusk and felt something enormous and silent filling the sky beyond the tree line. I had been orienting toward this all along. Every prayer had been aimed exactly here. What I can tell you about the presence is limited by language, but I will try. I was known. That is the center of it. I was completely, perfectly, entirely known. Every corner of my life was visible and present. Every moment of pride and selfishness, every time I had been impatient and unkind to my children when they were small, every evasion and small cruelty and silence when courage would have been the right answer. Every morning I had chosen comfort over faithfulness. All of it was there, fully lit, completely visible, and there was no condemnation in that knowing. That is the thing I could never have imagined before I experienced it, because nothing in my earthly life had prepared me for it. I expected something like a courthouse. What I found was something like being held by someone who had loved you before you were born and would love you after everything else was finished, without condition and without limit and without the slightest fatigue. I saw my life, not as I usually remembered it, as a sequence of events moving forward through time, but as a whole, as a complete thing, like standing back from a quilt and seeing the pattern that no individual square can show you when you hold it close. And the moments that were illuminated were not the ones I would have chosen to be proud of. They were small ones. The morning my youngest boy was sick and afraid at age 7, and instead of going to work, I stayed home and lay in bed beside him all morning, talking about baseball and nothing at all, just so he would not be alone in his fear. The afternoon on Route 11W that I stopped to help an old man with a flat tire and missed my own appointment entirely and never mentioned it to anyone. The Sunday I put my hand on my father's shoulder after he had preached to a nearly empty church and told him it was the finest sermon I had heard in my life, because it was the most honest one. Those were the moments I saw shining, not the acres I had worked, not the money made or lost. The moments I had given something of myself without stopping to calculate the cost. And I understood something in that place that I have spent 26 years trying to put into ordinary words. I understood what this life is for, all of it, the whole long, complicated, and sometimes heartbreaking business of being alive on this earth. It is practice. It is the practice of love. Every moment of it, the good ones and the broken ones, and the ones you would give anything to do differently, is an opportunity to practice the kind of love that actually exists in that place. The love I felt there was not a reward for good behavior. It was what reality is made of. And every time on this earth that any human being chooses kindness, chooses patience, chooses to see another person as fully real and worthy, they are touching the substance of that place. They are practicing eternity. I did not want to come back. I want to be honest about that, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering here. There was nothing in me that wanted to re-enter the weight and the cold and the limitation of a broken body lying on frozen ground in Tennessee. But there was a communication, not in words, nothing so small as words, more like a certainty settling into the center of me, that I was not finished, that there were people in this world who needed to hear what I had been given to see, that my return was not a penalty, but a commission, and that when my true time came, the door would be open, and this place would be exactly where I would be going, and it would be even more than this, and none of what I had feared my whole life needed to be feared at all. The return was not gentle. That is the most accurate thing I can say about it. It was like being pulled back through a wall by the collar. The cold hit me as a physical blow, the November air like a fist against my face. The weight of my own chest was crushing, as if gravity had doubled while I was gone. There was pain coming back into my hands, my back, my ribs, where someone was pressing hard. There was noise, voices, an engine, equipment I later learned was a defibrillator, and a man's voice sang a name that took me several seconds to recognize as my own. And I was back in the cold, back in my body, back in Tennessee on a November morning with frost in my hair and someone's hands on my sternum. But I was not the same man who had put his hand on that ladder. In the years since that morning, I have told this story many times, in many different settings. Some people hear it, and something lights up behind their eyes, immediately, like a match being struck in a dark room. Some people nod politely and look at their shoes. A few have wanted to argue the theology of it with me, and I do not resent that. I understand it, because I was a man who kept his faith at a careful intellectual distance for most of my life. I am not standing here asking you to believe every detail of what I have described. I am asking you to consider the possibility with your whole heart that what waits for you on the other side of this life is not darkness, not nothing, not the end of anything you have loved. He knows your name. He has always known your name. The way you know the name of someone you loved before they were born and will love after everything else is finished. I know this now not as theology, not as doctrine, not as a proposition I have accepted in my mind. I know it the way I know the sound of Helen's voice in the next room. I know it as a fact that lives in the body. And on the days when this old body reminds me it is wearing out, when the stairs are harder and the cold gets deeper and the mirror is less familiar, I am not afraid. I know where I am going. I know what is waiting. I know that everything I have loved on this earth will be there, made whole, made new, standing in the light that breathes. Until that day, I am here. I believe I am here for exactly this, to sit with you in whatever fear or grief or doubt you are carrying, and to tell you plainly, do not be afraid. The love on the other side of this life is more real than anything you have ever touched, and it has always been reaching toward you. Every single day of your life, it has been reaching toward you. Let that be enough to carry you home.